Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. We're really excited and privileged to have Nicole here with us. Today's Lunch and Learn, we're going to be talking about accessible recruitment and hiring, which is really exciting. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge we are in the traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, known as the Mi'kmaqi. As treaty people, we're committed to reconciliation. And we'd like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 50 African Nova Scotian communities whose culture, heritage, and histories have been and remain a key part of this province for more than 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. We'd also like to recognize that the Accessibility Directorate funds our Lunch and Learns, as well as this recording will be on our Municipal Ideas website after this Lunch and Learn. So I'd like to welcome Nicole to our Lunch and Learn here.
Great. Thank you so much, Roxanne. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started as we do only have an hour. I just have to juggle my screen here a little bit. Can you just confirm that you're seeing a slide deck that says accessible recruitment and hiring?
Yes.
I can see it.
Great. All right. Thank you and welcome. Um, okay, I've got two screens on the go here. Just one second. Okay, thank you. Many of you already know that the ACE project, so it's um, Accessibility Confident Employers Project, is a project of Sea Change CoLab, and we are funded by the Government of Canada with a lot of partnership with the Accessibility Directorate here in Nova Scotia. So my name is Nicole Cammert. I am a second-generation Canadian born to Dutch and Scottish immigrants. I'm a wife, a sister, a daughter, a mother of two, and I live, work, and play in Unama'ki, or Cape Breton Island, also known as Land of the Fog. I live right on the river here in Sydney River, so I feel very blessed to be close to, big sky and lots of beautiful water. I'm a white, cisgender, straight settler woman with intersecting chronic and episodic disabilities, some of which are non-apparent. In terms of a visible description, I have long, semi-curly hair, kind of blondish. It's pulled back. I am wearing sunglasses today as part of what I need to do for my own disability. And I'm wearing a blue and white striped shirt with gold earrings. So thank you, Roxanne, for doing an introduction and the land acknowledgement. I want to just get started about why ACE, and I'm not going to take a lot of time here at the beginning because we do want to dive into into content. So many of us know that 2 in 5 Nova Scotians have a disability, and nearly everyone knows somebody with a disability or will acquire a disability at some point in their life. We also know that 1 in 3 working age Nova Scotians live with a disability. So the biggest barrier to accessibility, and for many of you, this won't come as a surprise, but it's ableist attitudes. So ableism is a form of discrimination. It's the false idea that disabled people are by default inferior, when in truth, disability is just another way for a mind and or body to be. So we are going to jump right in. Our goal today is really empowering employers. And as I said, we're really getting into accessible hiring practices. And so what I'm going to do, folks, in just a moment, I'm going to introduce sort of the model that we're using. And you may have seen this model before if you've been on any webinars with ACE. But I first want to say that we do not sort of try to come across as the experts. We aim to be as accessible as possible in our own work, and we are still learning. So I will likely make some mistakes today, and that is part of my learning process. We share the why, the what, and the how of being accessibility confident employers through training and educational resources. So as I mentioned, this is only a 1 hour session. This is a pretty big topic, the art of inclusive hiring. So I do want to just say we're going to touch on some things today, but we can't dive super deep because we don't have a ton of time. But I do want to mention that we do have an on-demand course on our learning platform. It's a free course, of course. So you can go to our website, find it there, and that program will take you a little bit deeper. So if you're watching here today, you will recognize as you get into this, you will recognize the pillars um, and some of the content. So let me start first by saying here, these are the pillars that we have been using in our work. So really it's about commitment. So committing to be an inclusive employer. And then we move to readiness, preparing to shift long-held beliefs and practices. So this is really about mindset. Support. So this is where we're really starting to think about actively recruiting diverse talent by providing support and accommodations. And then hiring. So how we adopt the hiring process to reduce bias and ensure diverse talent. So I know there's only a couple of us here today in the live session. So Roxanne and Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to help me out here. We are going to, between the three of us, decide on something here in just 1 second. So let me just switch this slide. I'm going to overview each of these pillars a little bit. And then together, the three of us are going to decide where we want to jump in. Do we want to jump in on pillar 2, 3, or 4? So I'm not including pillar 1 as an option because we're assuming that anyone here that's watching at any point is probably past that point of commitment, particularly because you're a prescribed public service body. But I will just share commitment. This pillar is really about committing to being an inclusive and equitable employer. And so some of the ways that that shows up is discovering how workplace accessibility benefits employers, creating and sharing an accessibility inclusion statement, and exploring and developing community partnerships. And here's some examples. So you may make a commitment to disability inclusion that's visible in your company's mission statement, or collaborate with local disability advocacy organizations or job placement agencies. So you'll see here, Pete's Frutique, they have written out their inclusion statement, and it is visible on their website. And one of the things they say at Pete's, we not only value diversity, we celebrate it. So that's a little bit about, the first pillar, and you can see there that it's sort of the foundation of getting started. So this is where I really would love for you to tune in. So we need to choose between pillars 2, 3, and 4, where we want to dive. So pillar 2 is readiness. So it's really about getting ready for change by shifting long-held beliefs about people with disabilities and diverse abilities. So it's about providing training and education for leaders and staff to support skills development, inclusion, develop and implement best practices to recruit people with diverse abilities, and develop and implement accessible job processes. So ways that might show up, for example, using clear and inclusive language, highlight inclusive policies, clearly outline the benefits and perks associated with the position that you'd be offering, focus on essential functions of the job, and use an accessible application process. Pillar 3 is, if you remember back in the circle, so we're now moving into support. So support is really about providing support and accommodations throughout the recruitment process. So it's about encouraging and supporting proactive disclosure of abilities, providing proactive accommodations to workflow, processes, equipment, and spaces to promote accessibility, and to create and outline benefits and perks that support all employees. So that might show up in really taking the time and putting the energy and the focus and the intention to create safer spaces for disability self-disclosure, providing proactive accommodations, and being prepared to offer reasonable accommodations during the hiring process and on the job. So this might include things like voice-to-text technology, flexible work arrangements, or modifications to the physical workspace. Okay, and then the last pillar is pillar 4. And again, we're going to decide between these 3 pillars. So the last one is hiring itself. So it's about adapting the hiring process to reduce bias and ensure diverse talent. So that might show up as in reducing bias in the selection process and how we might do that. Screening candidates instead of screening out to build candidate pools, and engage different interview styles and approaches. So here you can see some examples: have a structured interview process, use a panel for interviewing candidates, define the interview style, provide questions in advance, for example, asking whether candidates need accommodations, and providing a description of the interview location and ensuring that the location is fully accessible. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop the screen share and come over to Roxanne and Stephanie. So coming back to the two of you, if you were to, you can just give me like a vote with your hand, because I can see you both and see that you both have ability to show me your hand. So if you can indicate or just begin where you would rather go, pillar 2, pillar 3, or 4. So readiness, support, or hiring. So Stephanie 2, okay, and Roxanne 2, okay. The crowd has spoken, so we're gonna jump in. I'm just gonna take a second here. I've got to get to the proper slide. Okay, and then I'll share my screen again. Give me 1 second while I scroll. There's probably a quicker way to do this, but okay. So while I'm getting to pillar 2, I just want to come back to the two of you. There we go. Any questions so far, Roxanne or Stephanie? Nope, good. Okay. All right, let me share my screen once again, and we'll jump into the content of pillar 2. And of course, if we have time, we'll continue on into pillar 3, but there we go. Okay. Share my screen again. Okay, just confirming that you can. Do you see a full screen with the slideshow, or do you see one with the?
It's not on full screen.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna just change my screen. Screen 2. Okay, here we go. Thanks for your patience. That's better?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so yes, pillar 2, let's dive in. Oh, sorry, there we go. Okay, so when we get into pillar 2 around readiness, this is really, we want to get ready for change by preparing to shift long-held beliefs about people with disabilities and diverse abilities. So it's really about providing training and education for leaders and staff to support skills, development, and a culture of inclusion. This also means developing and implementing best practices to recruit people with diverse abilities and to develop and implement accessible job applications. So we're going to get into each of these pieces, but as a little bit of an outline, that's where we are. So the first section is about training and education for leaders and staff. Here we go. Okay, so first of all, really, as I said at the outset, is about really shifting mindset here. So it's understanding the value of inclusion. So it's the importance of disability inclusion and understanding applicable laws. So of course, we know we have to do this, especially as a PPSB. You're already at this stage. Understanding that there is a duty to accommodate as a fundamental human right, and training on inclusive hiring practice for better support of employees with disabilities. There we go. Um, so as we get into this, areas that we'll cover is awareness of disability inclusion principles, familiarity with relevant laws and accommodation, techniques for fostering a culture of inclusion. Okay, well, there we go. All right. I'm flipping between two screens, folks, so apologies for kind of looking back and forth. So the first thing we're going to talk about is updating job descriptions for clarity. So I'm sure many of you, as you were engaged in the job search at one point in your life or another, you've met up with and have seen all kinds of ranges of job descriptions. Some come in the forms almost like of a mini book, and others come across as academic writing almost, and truly not terribly accessible. So these are just some ideas and tips and wise practices for helping to make job descriptions more clear and more accessible and more inclusive. So the first thing is use clear, concise language. We want to avoid jargon and unnecessary complexity. So really about keeping it simple and include wage range or salary. And this is something that you'll see more and more, and actually provinces across Canada, there's been a couple, they're making this mandatory, and I hope that Nova Scotia will at some point follow. There's a number of job sites across the country and in other places where people can post job descriptions and openings for roles. And some places, I believe Imagine Canada is one, I know Impact Organizations of Nova Scotia is one, unless you include really clearly the range, the salary range or the salary, you can't actually upload the job description itself. So it's becoming more and more, I wouldn't say quite standard yet, but it is definitely moving in that direction. And obviously a really a great practice, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, and when you're thinking about where to hire or where to place job ads, you want to think about reaching out to diverse talent by ensuring that accessibility of recruitment platforms and applicant tracking systems are available. And you want to partner with organizations like Kibbe and Able and Available. And this could also look like, you know, partnering with your local community college and developing partnerships with them to promote the ad. So creating accessible and inclusive job postings, as I said before, you want inclusive language. You want to really highlight inclusive policies and flexible work arrangements if they're available, and be sure that you're spelling those out very clearly. And for those of you who have taken some of our courses before around digital communications and screen readers, you'll know that accessible formatting is really, really important. So as you're putting out your job description out into the world, you want to make sure that the formatting is suitable for a screen reader. So for example, your headings, your bullet points, you want to use alternative text. If you are putting an image in, you want image descriptions. So if you want some more information about that, if you haven't done any of those programs, certainly we have programs on our learning management system that can really guide you through that. But in terms of accessible formatting, things that you want to think about are enhancing readability and accessibility. So like I said, using headlines and bullet points, and you want to make sure that your paragraphs are short. And you know, one thing that I'm a student actually in my MBA currently, so it's like living in two worlds almost. In an academic setting, it's almost like the opposite of this, right? Long sentences, long paragraphs, complex topic ideas. And in the end, you've got to read it about 17 times to understand what anybody is saying, or at least that's my experience. So we want to move further and further away from that and make sure the sentences and paragraph structures are easy to read, easy to digest. And that certainly doesn't mean like dumbing it down, you know, and excuse the phrase. It's not about that at all. It's about making the language accessible and making ideas simple to grasp and not terribly complex. We want to provide alternative formats as well, so HTML and accessible PDFs. And we also want to consider options for video introductions and alternative application formats. So as an example, now this isn't for a job position, but it is for a board position. I volunteer with our local YMCA board of Cape Breton here in Sydney. And this is a practice we put into play because we were absolutely trying to put this into practice. And so one of the options we gave people in order to apply, you could choose, the traditional cover letter and a resume, or I should say, or you could also apply with a video introduction and just record yourself without even having to send in, a full resume. We wanted to make that accessible to folks. And we had many comments about that process and how easy it was, and it felt that people could really come off as they truly are. So a wonderful practice to do either in addition to or as an option to the traditional cover letter and resume. In the benefits and perks section, and this is where I think it's really important as well. Like one thing we talked about a moment ago is including the salary or the salary range. But when we want to think about the full compensation package too, so when we think about that, it includes benefits and sort of perks of the job. So we want to clearly outline those. So that might include healthcare options, disability accommodations and support programs, and really comprehensive details that help candidates with specific needs. When you're writing the job description, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing the essential skills and the functions of the roles and avoid listing non-essential physical demands. So again, we want to be really clear about this. Oftentimes you might see a job description and it might have like 18 bullet points or 20 bullet points. And, maybe only 7 of them are really the core essential skills to the role. So it's really about getting crystal clear about what those are. So doing the work up front so we can communicate it wisely. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second. So again, Roxanne and Stephanie, just inviting you in. Any questions or thoughts on that first section?
That's good information. Thanks. I'm writing things down furiously. It's good.
Great. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is really, I mean, you're seeing it more and more in practice. But I think part of writing job descriptions, as I said, is like really putting in the upfront work and sort of getting away from some of the ways we used to do things, and making sure that it's clear and accessible for all people to read or to take in other formats. Okay, let me just switch over here. So we're now moving into advertising and promotion. So then how do you get the word out? So you've got a fabulous position you want to advertise for, and you want to reach as diverse a community as possible. So it's really important to choose the right platforms instead of just always thinking about the traditional ways that we might do our outreach and the sharing of positions that are open. So we want to assess the accessibility of job advertising platforms. For example, LinkedIn does have accessibility features. So that's something you want to make sure that and actually this is something I want to learn more about because I'm not exactly sure what the accessibility features are. So I may do some more digging into that. And that may be a piece that we'll include in our resource library as well. Okay, whoops, sorry. Okay, and then I mentioned earlier about connecting with community organizations. So we want to engage with disability serving organizations. One example I gave was Nova Scotia Community College. They're a fabulous organization to reach out to for obvious reasons. They have students graduating and looking for work or co-op terms or whatnot. And they reach out and have a lot of students that are obviously in their pipeline. So we want to build those relationships, and we want to, advertise and promote those roles within and through partner organizations that are, engaged with disability, folks with disabilities. We also want to use targeted recruitment and social networking sites. So with the accessible application process, we want to ensure accessibility throughout the entire process. So we want to make sure it's compatible. Anything we put out there is compatible with assistive technologies. And we also want to provide alternative submission methods. So not everyone can, for example, more and more you'll see organizations using a portal, couldn't find the word, a portal. So in addition to doing a cover letter and a resume and sending it in, you may also have to duplicate that work and put it in through a portal. Now that portal may not always be accessible. In fact, more often than not, they're not terribly accessible. So we need to make sure as employers that we're providing an alternative to that. If that is the only way that folks can submit their application, we need to give other options, such as video, for example, or being able to send it in by email, or even making a phone call. And we want to make sure that we are adhering to web content accessibility guidelines. So that's WCAG 2.2. And again, if this is something that is fairly new to you, I would encourage you to go over to, and this is not, we don't get paid for this, right? It's not a sales mission here, but I do want to say that there's lots of resources in our resource library. And we have specific courses on digital communication and digital accessibility. So this piece around web content accessibility guidelines does fall into some of that curriculum. So you can dig in there for more information. Okay, and then throughout the recruitment process, of course, you always want to encourage open communication. Not only does this start to help build relationship and trust right from the beginning, it also encourages candidates to request accommodations that they might need early on in the process. And this, of course, will touch on in other components around psychological safety and creating safe environments for disability disclosure. So if you can model that right up front, all the better. We also want to ensure that our interview processes are accessible and inclusive, and we'll get into that more. And that's kind of more in the next pillar. Okay, sorry, and then in the next slide here. So making interviews more accessible. Sorry, I'm going to pause once again. Roxanne and Stephanie, I know I'm kind of moving fairly quickly through these because even in this pillar, there's quite a bit, and there's, very tangible things that we can apply and other things that are like, oh, we've never touched on that before, and we need to start doing this. So I just want to take a little pause, see if you have any questions or, any feedback so far, things that are surprising you or things that you feel like you could apply right away.
I'm following along well. Sounds all good to me.
Okay, great.
I think this is really interesting because these are some great practices to be like embedding into organizations and into companies. But sometimes HR, it's so hard for them to kind of like move away from like the structures they already have. And I'm just like, as you are presenting, I'm just wondering what's an easier process they can take to kind of transition to make things more accessible? Like, what are some things that they can start with to begin that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things that I would say. Some of the tools and suggestions that I've already shared would be really great. One thing that I find really helps employers to see the difference is to line up, say, their traditional job description, and then have someone like yourself or others write a job description that is using these practices and put them side by side. And then do a bit of a comparison, right? And talk about the differences. And you may even have someone in your organization with a, well, guaranteed folks do, with a disability, and get some firsthand feedback. Which is the job description that you prefer? Which one feels more accessible? Which one feels more friendly? Which one feels like safer to apply to? Things like that, I feel like would really go a long way. So, you know, that I'm holding up my two hands here, like compare and contrast the differences. That would be a huge piece, I think, to help convert the unconverted. And it's also a process like anything, right? Like the way we show the pillars, it looks like a circular motion, right? Like you're going from commitment to readiness to support to hiring. But in reality, it's a bit of a spiral. So you might do a little bit and then spiral back to commitment. And there's a lot of internal education that has to happen at various levels, particularly getting away from some of those more, I don't know, the more complicated or complex hiring practices that we seem to have gone to in terms of, like, in favor of covering ourselves or whatever it might be, right? And really asking ourselves why and coming back to these practices. Is that helpful, Roxanne?
Yeah, that is. Thank you so much.
Great, you're welcome. So yeah, now you've made some selections and you're moving towards interviews. So these are some tips around making interviews more accessible. So the first one, if needed, if someone is looking for that, looking for or booking an ASL interpreter and using straightforward questions. And a huge practice that more and more organizations are adopting is providing questions in advance and offering those in various document formats. Um, and as you know, like there might be a candidate that's being interviewed on a Tuesday, one on a Wednesday, one on a Thursday. So instead of sending out all of the questions, say on a Monday to all candidates, you want to make sure that the process is somewhat equitable. So you might say, we are going to send the questions 24 hours in advance, and you set yourself a reminder and send those out so that each candidate has a similar range of time to prepare. With the exception, of course, if folks need and ask for more time with the questions, then you want to make sure you provide that accommodation. A piece that I want to share on that as well, just in terms of respecting people's times. I've seen other organizations, if they're interviewing someone on a Monday, they might send the questions on a Friday. So one thing that folks are moving more and more toward is not sending anything on a Friday that would ask candidates to do any kind of work or prep over their weekend if they're preparing for, say, for example, an interview on a Monday. So just again, like practices within the organization to protect people's time and their energy. And of course, as you're thinking about if you're doing in-person or digital interviews, making sure that there's truly accessible options. So for example, if you're interviewing someone in person, you want to describe what the location is like. If there's a ramp or stairs, if there's any accessibility issues that they need to be aware of, that signs are there, if there is or isn't Braille. And then same with remote interview options, asking what they may need, and ensuring that you can provide that to the best of your ability. So key takeaways from this piece is the importance of training, accessible recruitment and inclusive job application processes, and building a culture of inclusion through effective practices and communication. So I'm going to stop sharing here for 1 second. And again, I'm going to look to you, Roxanne and Stephanie. We do have a little time left. We could start to touch on support if you like, or we can just have a conversation about Pillar 2 in terms of readiness. What's feeling right for the two of you?
I could hear a little bit about support.
About support? How about you, Roxanne?
Sure,
Should we
that
go
works
into
for me.
support?
Yeah.
Okay. let's do that then. There's some great takeaways in here, and again, a lot of these resources and tips are going to be on our site, in our resource library. Okay, so just coming back, second, I'm going to blow up this screen over here. So pillar 3, sorry, I'm going to go back. Pillar 1 is commitment. Pillar 2 is readiness. It's really about getting ready by your job descriptions and preparing for the interview. Pillar 3 is about support, and pillar 4 is the hiring process. So let's jump into support here. So support is really about providing support and accommodations throughout the entire recruitment and hiring process. So it encourages support, proactive disclosure of abilities. We talked about that a moment ago. So really wanting to communicate right from the beginning, and that includes on the job description, that you're trying to create inclusive workplaces by modeling that right from, the job description and forward. You want to provide proactive accommodations to workflow, processes, equipment, and spaces to promote accessibility, and create and outline benefits and perks that support all employees. So accommodating employees with disabilities. So just to review, an accommodation is a responsive tool to adjust environments, services, and products to be able to be used by someone with a disability. Accommodations are solutions that remove or reduce barriers in the environment for one person or a group of people. So accommodation examples can include assistive and adaptive technologies, extra time during an interview to complete testing, for example, flexible working arrangements, and that could include location and hours, and providing things like noise canceling headphones or sensory friendly environments. For myself, I often need a space where lights are dimmable, or as dark of a room as possible if I have a particularly bad episode of my chronic disability. But for others who may have low vision, they may need quite the opposite. So it's really about making sure that you're not making assumptions about what someone needs, and trusting that they know best what they need, and trying to accommodate accordingly. So in terms of supporting them through policy and procedure changes, you want to think about things like modifying work hours, location of duties, and how tasks are expected to be completed. So as an example, modifying work hours for someone that may live a distance away from, if people need to come into the office, they may need more time in the morning to get ready to come to the office. They may rely on public transportation, for example, and it's too busy or it's too difficult to get the bus at 7:30 or 8 a.m. So it might actually be a very simple shift to start, instead of saying you start at 9, work it out together. And it may be as simple as saying you start at 10 and working that out. Same with location of duties, depending on the role itself. You may be able to have your staff work from home or do a combination of, and how tasks are expected to be completed and then communicated as well. In terms of support, you might be able to, you could think about offering supports in the form of employment coaches, ensuring that your space can accommodate guide dogs and service animals. People may have a personal support worker or workplace attendant or interpreter. So being aware of those needs, and obviously being very accommodating in that way. And this is one that people talk about quite a bit, and we've touched on this a little bit, about equipment. What kind of equipment can you provide to support an individual? And again, this could be very different for different folks, even though they may identify with having a similar disability. So technical devices, including assistive technology, alternative work materials, communication aids, and ergonomic workstations. Structural modifications, depending on the person with the disability and what their accommodations are. You may need to, and especially now with the new standards out, look at ensuring that there's handrails, ramps, widened doorways, accessibility to common facilities, and sensory modifications as well. So for example, for someone with ADHD, I'm just as an example off the top of my head, there was a time where open workspaces and shared workspaces were kind of all the new thing in designing workspaces. Well, that may not work for somebody who has auditory processing difficulties or anything like that, and they may need a private office where they can close the door and have quiet space. So just thinking about what works best for the individual in terms of showing up in their best way and doing their work. And this could also include flexible hours and work environments. And again, we touched on this. So working from home multiple days a week, or even part-time hours or split shifts. As an example for me, when I'm having a difficult time with my eyes, I can only be on screen for short spurts. So my workday kind of extends sometimes over like 12 to 14 hours because of, I can only be on the computer for say an hour and a half, and then I need to rest and then come back to it. And my employer is great. And that way I can, unless I, have meetings, and then I schedule my time accordingly. So it's just about being super flexible where you're able, and scheduling work only at one location. And again, that's where needed. And this comes back to accessible communication. So wanting to ensure that we're providing written materials in alternative formats. So documents, a good and wise best practices is documents with a font size of at least 18 points and easy to read sans serif font. So a sans serif font is, what you're seeing on screen here is an example of sans serif. So nothing with, curly cues or anything like that. Like Garamond would be an example of a serif font. So it's a little harder to read versus say Verdana or Arial. And this really helps to accommodate employees who have low vision. You want to also make sure that you have accessible PDF formats, and so that they're made accessible for screen reading software. And written materials that include photos, again, I touched on this a little bit. It'll also make it easier for some employees with cognitive challenges to understand what is being described. So providing an image to help encapsulate what it is you're saying in text format, and then using alternative text to describe the images. And so there is a feature. And again, if you go to the course that we offer, you can see how you can do that. You can use an alternative text so that screen readers can still capture that as a description of the image. And in terms of the physical space, so if you do have an employee coming to a physical office, you want to make sure that all major pathways to key areas or functions of your workspace are clear of obstacles and well marked. And this includes, pathways to the washroom facilities, to the kitchen, or any other shared spaces. Perhaps you have a lunchroom or a boardroom. So it's not just about ensuring clear pathways to their office, it's about the entire workspace. And this will make it easy for all employees to navigate the space. I want to just share this piece with you as the accommodation myth. So a myth, making accommodations for employees with disabilities is complicated and expensive. But in truth, so the fact is that various sources in Canada note that between 50 and 80% of suggested accommodations actually cost the employer less than $500. So again, I'll just use myself as an example. In my office here, I have a dimmer switch. And so to make that kind of a switch might cost $20, for example, if the wiring is fairly simple, or if you have to call in an electrician. And that's pretty much one of the only accommodations I need in terms of physical space. So essentially close to free. So it's getting over that idea that accommodations are complicated or expensive. Just noting the time here, I'm going to kind of speed through these last couple so we can get through support, and then we'll wrap up for today. So in terms of accommodations, approximately 20% of workers with disability require accommodations. So when you think across your labor force, the chances are you will have folks on your team or people that you're welcoming into your organization that may well need an accommodation, and that can come in all kinds of form. As we just said, accommodations are often less than $500 or don't cost a thing. And employees with disabilities take less sick time and show more loyalty. So again, this is based on studies where folks with disabilities that feel like they're in a safe working environment, and by safe, I mean not just physically safe, psychologically, emotionally, mentally safe workplace where they can show up as their whole self, they tend to have more of a feelings towards loyalty than that company or with that company or organization, and in fact do take less sick time, especially where there's, flexible work arrangements, for example. So this piece we've touched on a little bit about encouraging self-disclosure and advocacy. So wanting to provide and create workspaces that are psychologically safe, to encourage employees to self-advocate, and to ask for the kinds of accommodations that they need. And also that we're making sure that we're avoiding intrusive questions and we're respecting confidentiality. So if I have a direct report that is sharing something with me, that goes nowhere else other than it stays with me, and or if it needs to go to HR in terms of creating that accommodation. And same thing, if people are sharing that they need an accommodation and you're able to provide that, you don't need to necessarily ask for what the diagnosis is. In fact, that shouldn't be a question that would be considered intrusive and stepping over boundaries for sure. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding that. So we want to start by creating safe spaces, right from the recruitment and hiring phases that we talked about. We understand that disclosure of disability in the workplace is in the process for a lot of employees to reveal their disabilities to employers. So the more comfortable they are, and perhaps if they see, and this is actually really great, sorry if you can hear my dog barking. This is a really great example of leadership. If someone in a management or a leadership position is a person living with a disability, if they're able to be transparent and talk about their disability and how they show up at work and what their needs are, that's actually modeling and creating safer spaces for other people to do the same thing. It's a really strong leadership quality. And I would encourage leaders to do that and to be able to talk about their own experiences. And also to listen with curiosity and intention and attention. In one of the programs that we offer, we do a role play that is around an employee coming to their employer and disclosing their disability. And there's two versions of it. One, which is like basically they've done everything wrong and shut the person down, and even though that they're trying to show up in their best selves, they're overstepping, they're asking inappropriate questions, they're rushing the person, versus the other scenario where the manager is listening carefully, asking the right questions, taking the time needed. So even role playing this with other employees or other coworkers so that you can get a better sense of how to do this. And guaranteed, if you're doing it for the first or second or third time, you might make mistakes. And we own those, and we learn from them, and we continue going. So in terms of disclosure during interviews, you cannot request a medical diagnosis during the interview stage. They also cannot ask questions about an applicant's disability unless a question relates to how an applicant would perform certain job tasks. Applicants who do disclose their disabilities before or during an interview may offer information about disability and accommodations, while others may focus on aspects of their backgrounds, such as previous work or educational experience, that they feel are more relevant. So obviously, and we've talked about this in other spaces too, the disclosure dilemma is very complex, and it revolves around challenges and decisions faced by individuals with disabilities when it comes to disclosing their disabilities to the employers. And that's it's a personal dilemma, and something that needs to be weighed out very closely. So, last slide, I think, yeah, I'm going to wrap up by saying this: tips for responding to somebody sharing and disclosing. You want to listen actively. You want to avoid intrusive personal questions and pay attention to the need. Direct the conversation to how this impacts them in the workplace, and provide clear information on supports available if requested. And as I said, you really want to model inclusion. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go to the end. You'll see that I'm going to stop the share here. There's a lot of depth in each of these pillars. And that is why I really recommend folks, if you want to dive deeper into these, to hop on the website and hop on the website, and you can do the 3-hour course to dig deeper. And I would also really encourage you to visit our resource library. Sorry, I'm just going to pull up one more slide here. Oh, goodness. Can't seem to work my slides today here. 1 second. Here we go. Okay, you're not getting the full screen, but here we go. So we do have a free resource library, and there are many opportunities coming up for free learning. We've got 2-hour skill builders coming up over the months of March, April, May. In fact, we have one tomorrow: accessibility, confident retention, and promotion. So it builds off of this course. And we have an in-person/hybrid learning event coming up in Wolfville on June the 4th, and that's an accessibility learning lab. And for those with seasonal workers and customer service workers, there's a self-paced online cohort coming up as well. So thank you so much for your time. And I know these are big topics and a lot to dig into, so appreciate your presence here. And yeah, once again, thank you, Roxanne, and thank you, Stephanie, for being here with me today.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a lot of great information.
It was a lot packed in, so I apologize for the speed, but we want to be able to give you some takeaways for sure.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was some really great information. And I feel like even each pillar, you can like kind of pull it out and do a presentation just on each pillar. And so I think this is really valuable information as our equity leads move forward into implementing their accessibility plans, as well as the equity and anti-racism plan. So these are some really great tools for them to think about of how they can actually implement this in their own organization. And we do have some of these resources. We're going to also add it to the AMAN's website, the Municipal Ideas website, so you'll have access to it over there. And some of the events also that Nicole mentioned will be on that website as well. You can register either through, it will direct it to Sea Change Collab, but it'll be on our website if you're looking for more information on that. So we really do appreciate your time, and thank you so much for presenting at our Lunch and Learn today.
My pleasure, and I hope to see you both again. Take care.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.